My name is Scott Denning. I'm a professor of atmospheric science at Colorado State University. And let's see, I grew up in upstate New York, Woodstock, New York, and then later in Brockport, New York, which is out kind of between Rochester and Buffalo. I think I was in the first grade, and there was a unit about planets, like Saturn and Jupiter, and I was like, what? No way! So I was really interested in that, and I decided, I was 6 or 7 years old, that I wanted to be an astronomer when I grew up. It was the 60s, it was during the Apollo era, and so there were all these moon launches and people walking on the moon when I was a child, and so that was very exciting. Eventually, I went to undergrad at the University of Maine. I told my advisor the first week I want to be an astronomy major, and they said, "Oh, there's no such thing. We don't do undergrad in astronomy. You have to major in physics, and then you can go to grad school for astronomy later." And so I said I would major in physics, and it was not what I had expected. I thought it would be cooler than it was. Freshman year of college, I took a summer road trip with some friends, and we went to the Grand Canyon, and we went hiking into Grand Canyon. I saw all those layers of rock and the deep time and all this cool stuff, and I just said, oh no, I'm going to become a geologist. So I did. I came back to Maine in my sophomore year and changed my major to geology, and then I, finished a geology degree. After that, I left school and I went off to be a geologist in the oil industry in 1984, and moved to Colorado, worked on oil wells, and it was dreadful. I was like the young guy, the new guy. I had to work night shifts. I worked 12 on, 12 off. 7 days a week, except when the drill wasn't working, and lived in a little trailer in the middle of North Dakota in the dead of winter, and climbed up with my down parka on the drill rig and collected little rock samples and brought them back and looked at them in a microscope, and it was just a sucky job, terrible job. And then luckily for me, the oil industry just imploded in 1985, and everybody got laid off. So hundreds of thousands of people got laid off, and of course so did I. And for a while, I delivered pizzas in Boulder, and I worked at a magazine subscription fulfillment service. It was, kind of a rough time. But then I got a job here at CSU with Jill Barron, who you probably know. I had done some work during my college years with a lab studying acid rain in New England, and she was doing similar work in Rocky Mountain National Park. So for 4 years, I worked with her and trudged up into Lockville Watershed every Tuesday, 200 Tuesdays in a row. I only missed one Tuesday in 4 years. And that was because there was 1.5 feet of snow in Fort Collins, and I couldn't get out of my driveway. That was a wonderful experience. And Jill was a fantastic mentor, allowed me to not just be the guy on the skis collecting the samples, but to analyze data and to help with interpretation and presenting and even some writing. And that was a wonderful sort of way to get my feet wet as being a researcher. So I decided to go to grad school, and I was already here at CSU, so I used my staff benefit package to take some classes in atmospheric science, and I really liked it. In 1990, I left Jill's lab and went over to be a full-time graduate student in atmospheric science. And I worked with a wonderful mentor there too, Dave Randall, who is a climate modeler. And I learned to be a climate modeler and to study the carbon cycle. So I work on what happens to the CO2 after we put it up in the air. How does it interact with plants? How does it interact with soils? How does it interact with the oceans? How does it blow around in the air? And I got my PhD in 1994 and stayed on for a postdoc. I was married and had kids, and my wife didn't want to just pick up her career and move to the other side of the country for me to do a postdoc someplace else. So we stayed here, and I wrote up my dissertation papers, and that was fun. And then in 96, I got a job at the University of California, Santa Barbara, as an assistant professor in a brand new school, the Bren School of Environmental Science and Management. And I was one of the first hires in the Bren School, and it was amazing. Trying to learn how to teach and learn how to build a research program, and I recruited grad students, and I wrote proposals, and I got sort of built a research presence. But then I had an offer to come back to CSU as a faculty member here, and that way my wife was able to get her career back. So after 2 years in California, we picked up and we moved back to Colorado, and I've been here ever since. What I've studied for 30 years now is the breathing of the earth. How does the earth and all of its living system exchange carbon gases between the atmosphere, the land surface, and the oceans? And in particular, what I work on is the tiny variations in CO2 concentration in the atmosphere and what they reveal about changes in biogeochemistry of the underlying surface. So these are very subtle changes, like less than 1% differences in CO2 from place to place. But we have a lot of measurements now. And you asked kind of what was my biggest contribution. And I mean, that's kind of it. I helped people to understand how very small variations in CO2 could be quantitatively interpreted as in terms of systematic changes in the metabolism of ecosystems. Changes in photosynthesis, changes in turnover time, changes in decomposition, changes in land use, changes in fire, all that kind of stuff. And that led ultimately to a system of observing that includes a new generation of Earth-observing satellites that measure CO2 from space, and a big sort of modeling system that is used to interpret those data. Now I'm 62 years old, and I am frankly burnt out on trying to pry $1 million a year in research funding out of the federal government. It's an unbelievable level of effort to fund a big research lab. At the peak of my career, I had 22 people that I was supporting full-time people. It was really hard, and I'm just too old for that. So now I just teach, and I'm just loving that. I am, I'm writing synthesis papers and doing sort of old person scholarly work, but I more than anything, I just love working with students. I love helping to explain complicated things to people so that the little lights can turn on behind their eyes and they can get excited about science. So that's kind of where I am now. I know that it's not entirely respectable for a scientist to walk away from the research side of the career. There are certainly some of my peers who are like, what the heck happened to Scott? He's no longer working on, inventing the next CO2 model. But I'm happier the way I am now. So there you go. So there's my story.